Okay, we are back working on the 99 Montero Sport. And for those of you who have worked on these 3.5 liter engines, you will know that almost everything is hard to get to. So that's why we have started on the easy things. In episode 2, we replaced the coolant temperature sensor. And today we will be draining the coolant, replacing the thermostat, and flushing the coolant system. Now, I do not condone the act of simply throwing parts at a vehicle and hoping that it fixes the problem. I do, however, support observing the symptoms, educating yourself, and then throwing parts at a vehicle hoping that it fixes the problem. That being said, the symptoms are as follows. One, we have a check engine light for the code P0118, which is indicating a problem with the coolant temperature sensor, and that is why we switched that out on the last episode. Symptom number 2 is the strong smell of gas on the outside of the vehicle. And no, it's actually not me this time, it's from the Montero. And I also have really bad fuel economy. It's about 15 miles to the gallon right now. So, my hypothesis is that because of the bad coolant temperature sensor, it is injecting way too much fuel into the system. And that's why I can smell it so strongly. And that's why the fuel economy is so bad. Symptom number 3 is that it is starting to run hot. Even when it's not under load, I noticed that the needle on the temperature gauge is creeping up higher and higher, even to the point where I've had to turn the heater on a couple of times just to get the needle to go back down. And the last symptom is the sound of running water behind the dash, which is an indicator that there is air in the coolant system, which also runs the risk of overheating. So, sticking to the plan, those are the symptoms. We have educated ourselves on coolant systems, and now we can start throwing parts at it. But before we do that, we need to drain the coolant out of this thing. So, starting by loosening this petcock valve, which is located at the bottom passenger side of the radiator. I've circled it up there in the top left corner for you. Just twist that plastic tab to the left and loosen it enough so the coolant starts coming out, or you can do what I did and just yank the whole thing out of there. But either way, you're going to get coolant coming out. Make sure you have a catch pan under there to catch all the coolant. And you'll probably want a catch pan with a pretty wide opening because the coolant just pours all over this cross member and there's no rhyme or reason to where it's going to go. Unless you want to rig something up, maybe with an additional hose so it will be a little bit cleaner. Also, if you remove the radiator cap off of the top, then the coolant will drain a lot faster. So this is just another angle of me backing off that petcock valve, and you will see here that as the plastic tab backs off, then the coolant will come out of this other tube in the front. And I just wanted to demonstrate here how you do not need to remove that plastic tab completely, but what do you know, it still makes a big mess anyway. You just need to be careful because coolant is poisonous, so if any animals were to get into it, it could potentially kill them. So be sure to capture as much as you can and take it to a recycling center. Okay, now that all the coolant is drained, we are going to remove the thermostat from this housing up top. It's just being held on by two 12mm bolts, so go ahead and loosen and remove those. There's one on top and one directly below it. And a quick side note, I am one of those guys who tries to remove the least amount of parts possible whenever I'm doing a repair, so you may get frustrated watching me struggle to get my hands and fingers in these tight areas. You could remove the fan shroud there, you could remove the belt that's getting in the way, but I'm just here to show you that you don't need to remove all of those parts in order to get the bolts out. You'll just have to struggle to find the right tool that will allow you to back those out. Ideally, you would want the right size ratchet extender or a ratcheting box wrench, neither of which I have in this video, but we make do with what we have, and I will speed this up so you don't have to watch me struggle for too long. And just a reminder, I am fully aware of the poor condition of this belt, and as soon as we get this coolant system flushed, we will go pick up the belt that we need to replace it. And I missed this before, but there is another 12 millimeter bolt holding this conduit to the thermostat housing. But once you get that off, you can go ahead and pop out that thermostat. All right, I am going to drop some science on you about thermostats, and feel free to fact check me because I have no idea what I'm talking about. So, the thermostat center chamber there is filled with a wax, I believe, that is solid when it's cold. And as the coolant temperature rises to the operating temperature, which is around 200 degrees, it melts that wax and opens the thermostat to allow the hot coolant to enter into the radiator, and that cools it down before it's recirculated back into the engine. All right, looking at the new thermostat, I noticed that it did not come with this black O-ring on there, but the old one looks like it's in pretty good condition, so I'm just gonna pop off the old one and reuse it. Actually curious on this because I feel like with a lot of gaskets and O-rings, they tell you that you should lubricate them before putting them on. And so I asked around quite a bit to see if I should do that with this thermostat O-ring. And the consensus that I got from most people is that with any O-ring or gasket that is twisted on, it should probably be lubricated to prevent it from getting stretched or torn as you're twisting it on. And since this one is just pushed on and it's not holding any oil or anything, it's just coolant, we're just going to go ahead and leave it dry. And then once you have the thermostat housing all bolted back up, you can go ahead and start refilling the radiator. I'm just going to refill it with water right now because we're going to be adding a coolant flush to it, and it's the middle of summer, so we don't need the antifreeze in it. And then we're going to drive that around for a while and let that coolant flush kind of get in all the nooks and crannies and clean out whatever buildup we might have in there. I did find a bunch of crusted up gasket material or something here. I was sure to get that out, not letting it fall into the coolant system. I don't want that floating around. Cleaning it up a little bit. This radiator is in pretty rough shape. All the plastic on it is so dried out and crusty that's probably going to need to be replaced soon. But this is the coolant system cleaner that I'm using. It's just Prestone. I got it at AutoZone. So we're just going to add this whole bottle, make sure that our coolant system is all topped off, close it all up, and then we'll drive it around and let the detergent do its magic. Before we drive, though, I do want to make sure that that new thermostat is working fine and that all the water is circulating. So I'm going to crank up that heater and rev it up a little bit to get all the water flowing through the heater core. And I'm going to monitor the temperature with this scan tool that I got. It's a pretty baseline model, but it does have some real-time info. So once I got it up to operating temperature, the scan tool is reading 192 consistently. So the thermostat's opening, the water's circulating, and I think we're about ready to take a first spin. And it's a warm, sunny day here in Utah, so we're just going to open up the sunroof and go for a little cruise. And just as a disclaimer, this is a time lapse, and I am not driving 85 miles an hour past an elementary school. I am going to be monitoring the temperature the whole time using my scan tool because the old temperature sensor was causing the coolant gauge on the dash to go all haywire. So this way I will have two ways to verify that the temperature, the operating temperature, is staying where it needs to. And as we finish up this test drive, I'm pleased to announce that everything is working the way that I hoped that it would. The temperature was staying nice and consistent, both on the gauge cluster and on the scan tool. And I just continued to drive it around for a couple hundred miles, at which point I drained out the water and the coolant flush and replaced it with antifreeze. The unfortunate news is that after a while, that old crusty radiator that I was talking about did spring a leak, it cracked right across the top. So the next video will just be about replacing the radiator and the radiator hoses. So look forward to that. Tune in for the next video.